Okay, this is the unit on Native Americans, and here we see a map of the present-day United States, and this is where the original tribes were located before the arrival of the Europeans, which is going to wreak havoc on their civilization and completely redraw the boundaries of this map. So as you can see here in Connecticut, we have the Pequot Native Americans, we have the Massachusetts Native Americans, which obviously are in Massachusetts. Some of the more well-known Native American groups you might have heard of, the Seminoles, the Cherokee, who most people know them from living out west, and we'll talk about how these groups of Native American tribes that lived here in the east are going to wind up in the Midwest, and then eventually we're going to see 90% of these Native American tribes completely wiped out after the arrival of the Europeans. So it really is one of the saddest chapters in American history, and this unit is all about a short history of what happened to the Native Americans. So the pre-Columbian period is simply the time when Native Americans lived here before the arrival of the Europeans, led by Christopher Columbus in 1492. There were 100 million Native Americans throughout North America, Central America, South America, throughout the Caribbean. Some of them farmed, some of them were hunters and gatherers, others were nomadic and moved about wherever the game traveled, is where they made their lives. Their histories were told by oral traditions. Their religion was spiritual in nature, and North and South America had no contact with the Old World. And by the Old World, I mean Europe, Africa, and Asia. So they weren't used to all of the diseases that were prevalent throughout those continents. And unfortunately, with the arrival of the white man, 90% will be wiped out by these diseases. Through the Columbian Exchange, we're going to see lots of plants and animals and diseases and, and other things transported back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. So it's called the Columbian Exchange. And we're going to see um, lots of examples that are going to change the way of life for the people living in the Americas as well as Europeans. For example, in Ireland, people lived off of the potato, but they weren't even around in Europe before they were brought to America or brought from America to Europe. And horses, which we think of with Native Americans living out in the West, horses were not even part of the Americas until the Europeans brought them here. So as the Europeans arrived and started setting up colonies in the Americas, the Native Americans are going to be pushed off their land by the British, by the Spanish, a little bit by the French and the Dutch. And the U.S. government's going to have policies that are going to completely destroy their way of life. And these Indian wars, from the middle of the 17th century all the way to almost the 19th century, are going to just decimate the Indian population. Many people think about Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims having dinner with the Native Americans. We don't know if that actually happened. One report states that they were thanking God for eliminating 700 Pequot men, women, and children, and that's what the real Thanksgiving was all about. A little bit different than how we think of it today. During the French and Indian War and also the American Revolution, the War of 1812, many Indians joined with the Americans in hoping that helping them attain victory could mean their land would be safe. Others saw that they really had no chance keeping their land, so they fought against the Americans, siding with the British and with the French. And as we know today, they did lose their land ever so slowly. And then we have the removal era wars where the Black Hawk, the Creek, the Seminole tribes are going to fight valiantly to keep their land, but eventually will be forced off. The most famous instance was the Trail of Tears, where we have these five Native American groups who live throughout the southeastern part of the United States. They're going to be forced on a long march, hundreds of miles. About 25% of them died from the cold, from the excessive heat, depending on the seasons, from starvation, from malnutrition, from murder itself. And the goal was to remove all Native Americans east of the Mississippi River and send them here to the Indian Territory. Today it's a state known as Oklahoma. It's one of the saddest chapters in American history. After the Civil War, many of those soldiers that fought um, both for the North and the South are going to find themselves sent out west to put down the Native Americans out there. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, gold was discovered there, and even though that land was promised to the Native Americans through a treaty, that treaty was ignored, which is a common theme throughout American history. The Sand Creek Massacre, the U.S. massacred up to 600 Native American men, women, and children. And once the Native American land was gone, they were forced onto reservations and forced to assimilate, which means to give up their way of life and adapt the white man's way. Custer's Last Stand was a very famous battle, one of the last victories for the Native Americans. All but one of the 210 American soldiers were killed, including Colonel Custer. But this just meant that more and more soldiers would be coming in to put down the Native Americans. So, short victory for the Native Americans, but ultimately they're going to lose the war. The last big battle for Native Americans was the Battle of Wounded Knee, fought in 1890, and U.S. troops ended up killing 200 men, women, and children to try to make it look like it was an actual battle, not a massacre. They placed guns in the dead hands of these men, women, and children, trying to make it look like the Americans were attacked, but they weren't fooling anybody. And this was the first time the U.S. Army broke out a new weapon, the machine gun, also known as the Hotchkiss guns, and the Native Americans didn't stand a chance. Here's the slain body of Chief Bigfoot. So, one of the saddest chapters in American history, Native Americans. This is just a brief introduction. Your homework is to write one paragraph about what you learned from this video, and we'll be getting into this stuff in much more detail in class. Good luck.